Good morning, everyone. Today is Tuesday. We are learning um, the ninth Perek of Mishnah's Trumas today, and we will be finishing Trumas on Thursday, Mitzvah Shem. So today's shir is sponsored by Nishmas Aaron Nachum and Simcha Kain, Yoshua Mordechai ben Shevsel, Bracha Sar Bashmol Leib, and Minam Moshe ben Yosef. May the Neshamas all have an aliyah. Here we go. Perek test starts off. We're talking about, okay, we know that the rules about a Kohen eating, he can eat Truma, he could drink Truma, and he could apply it to his body. But he's not allowed to plant it. As we learned in Shvius, Perek. He's not allowed to plant it. It's us who plant. If someone did plant seeds of Truma, then that which grows from them is chulin, according to Torah law, meaning that it's regular tevel, and um, it's regular tevel, and may not be eaten before it is meistered. The Chachamim, however, decreed that whatever grows from Truma must be treated as Truma, and as such, it's always forbidden to non-Kohanim. So if they plant Truma, which they're not allowed to plant, if they do plant it, whatever grows from that will be considered Truma. And that way, the Chachamim were able to reduce the amount of Truma that was planted. Why should a Kohen plant Truma when he could plant a regular crop that's chulin and actually make money from that? So we start off with Mishnah Aleph Hazareya Truma Shogeg. If someone planted Truma by mistake without knowing that it was Truma, Yofech, he may turn over the soil with a plow to destroy the growths. Amazing. If someone planted Truma knowingly, Yikayim, he must maintain the growths and not destroy them. Why? Because they do not have, the growths do not have Truma sanctity even under rabbinic law, until they reach 1/3 of their full growth. Nevertheless, even before that stage, since they potentially have the status of Truma, a field of such growths can be described as a field of Truma. The Chachamim therefore decree that the growths be maintained because destroying them look like he's destroying Truma. However, a field in which Truma seeds were planted by mistake does not even seem like a field of Truma, since the planter himself was unaware that he was planting Truma, is therefore permitted to destroy the growths in that case. You don't want to give the appearance that you're destroying Truma. That's a bad idea. So therefore, you would keep them Im hevi shlish, and once they have reached 1/3 of their full eventual growth, bein shogig ben mezid yikayim. He must maintain them whether he planted the truma by mistake or willingly. Um, yeah, you can't destroy them after they grow a third because then they have their truma kedusha. Oh, but pishtan, but in the case of flax, that is truma, mezid yofech. Even if it was planted knowingly, the soil must be turned over to destroy the new flax. This chiyuv applies even after it has grown a third. Okay, Mishnah Beis. And that which was planted, a field in which Truma was planted, is subject to the laws of Leka Shifra and Peah, even though Truma is usually exempt from these laws. So so why is it chayiv in the matanos? Because since the produce of the field is Truma only under rabbinic law, it is not exempt from the Doraisa laws that apply to ordinary tevel, which includes the obligations of Leka Shifra and Peah. The Aniya Yisrael, the Aniya Kohanim Elaptim. And both poor Yisraelim and poor Kohanim may gather its Leka Shifra and Peah. The Aniya Yisrael Mochin Ashalahem, the Kohanim Demei Truma. And the poor Yisraelim, who they may not eat the produce because of its rabbinic Truma, they can sell theirs to the Kohanim, but only for the lower price of Truma. Truma sells for a much lower price than Chulin because there's less demand for Truma, and the fact that only Kohanim eat Truma and only in certain conditions. Especially when Truma most of the time is being given for free. So there's very little monetary value to buy for Truma. And the money that they receive from the sale is theirs to keep. So the Nia Yisrael, they can't eat the Truma, they can sell it and they can use the money for whatever they wish. Rabbi Tarfon disagrees, and he says, Lo yulakatu ela aniyah kohan, that the Chachamim's decree that no one may gather leka shecha and peah from this field except for poor kohanim. Shema yishlechu yitnu chesof piyah. Why? Because poor Yisraelim are likely to forget that the truma produce is forbidden to them and mistakenly put it into their mouths and eat it while they are harvesting. Rabbi Akiva said to Rabbi Tarfon, in order to disprove him, in Cain, if that's the case, the Yisraelim are not allowed to gather produce in the field of Truma, lo yulakatu ela tahorim. Then Kohanim too should not be allowed to gather there unless they are tohar, but not when they're tummy. Because the Kohen who's tummy should be treated just like Yisrael, since a tummy Kohen is also forbidden to eat this Truma d'Rabbanan. Therefore, there should be no prohibition against these. But we don't see any prohibition against the tummy Kohen doing that. Therefore, there should be no prohibition against Yisrael doing so either. So the Tosos Ansei Shem says that the Tarfon would argue that there is a difference between Yisrael and Tamei Kohen, which is that Yisrael might unthinkingly eat the Truma he is gathering, but there's no such concern in the case of a Tamei Kohen because the Kohanim are especially careful in observing the laws that affect Kohanim, and they're less likely to mess up than Yisrael is. Okay, Mishnah Gimel. Continuing with our discussion from before, that the field of Truma d'Rabbanan is obligated in Meiser Rishon and Meiser Sheni and to Meiser Ani as well. The Aniyah Yisrael and Aniyah Kohanim not to them, and both the poor Yisraelim and the poor Kohanim may take the Meiser Ani. The Aniyah Yisrael Mochen Eshlehem the Kohanim b'Demei Truma, and the poor Yisraelim who may not eat it because it is rabbinic Truma may sell theirs to Kohanim only for a lower price of Truma. The Hadamim Shalehem, and the money they receive from the sale is theirs to keep. Hachove Meshubach. Okay, so now we're talking about how a grain that grew in the Truma field should be threshed. So someone who beats the seeds out of the grain with sticks is more praiseworthy than one who threshes it with an animal. This one is forbidden to let his animals eat the growth of Truma. But if one wishes to thresh the grain using an animal, what should he do? How does he prevent them from eating Truma without violating the biblical prohibition against muzzling animals when they're threshing? He should hang baskets from the neck of the animal, the noise in the sochim osomin, and put into them animal fiduchulin, the same species as the one being threshed. That way, the nimsa lo zomim as a behema, thus he is not in muzzling the behem. He's not muzzling the animal, since it can eat food of the same species from the basket that's brought, lo machal as a truma, and nor is he feeding it truma, since he's providing it chulin instead. Very cool. Mishnah Daled. Gedole Truma. The the growths of Truma are treated as Truma. So what grows from Truma is also Truma. Gidulin, chulin. But the growths of these growths are ordinary, non-Truma produce, which is permitted to everyone once it has been meisered. The Chachamim, uh, the use of the rabbanon against eating Truma growths only applies only to that which grew from seeds of actual Truma. If the seeds of Truma growths are planted, their growths are not treated as Truma, but rather as tevel, just like ordinary growth. It's only the first generation. Um, right. So the Yerushalmi says that this leniency is limited to plants such as wheat and barley, whose seeds decay when planted with entirely new plants growing in their place. As opposed to special species like onions, whose seed is a bulb, which does not decay but expands and gives rise to new bulbs, that even the growth of the growths are going to be usher. Um, okay. Achal tevel, but some planted tevel, Rishon, or Meiser Rishon, whose Meiser is not, whose Trumas Meiser has not yet been separated, with Sefich Shvius, or Sefichin of Shemitah. Sefichin, we said, were aftergrowths that they grew on their own during Shemitah. They're allowed to be eaten according to the Torah, but Chachamim answered them. Uh, Truma chutz laaretz, or the truma of produce that grew outside of Eretz Yisrael. We said that there were a couple of countries near Eretz Yisrael that you would need to take trumas on, which we discussed in the previous Mishnah. Maduma, or Maduma, which is a mixture between a forbidden mixture of truma and chulin, Rabbi Kurin, and on the first fruits, Gidulehem, chulin. Their growths are ordinary produce, which, after it has been meistered, is permitted to everyone. Gidule hektish, u'meiser sheni chulin. The growths of hektish and meiser sheni are also chulin, but they must be redeemed. U'poda osam bisman zram, though one may redeem them for what they were worth at the time of their planting, even though they are now worth far more. Mishnah Hay, continuing Mishnah Hay. Okay. So we know that there are some plants that disintegrate and they decay in the ground and they have a new plant grow in the place. And we also know that there are seeds which are bulbs, like the onions, that just give rise to new bulbs, but they don't actually decay. So we're going to talk about the halachic distinctions between these two types of produce regarding Truma. Mea legina shel Truma v'achas shel chulin. This is Mishnah Hay. If 100 rows of Truma and 1 row of chulin are planted in a field and it's not known which row is chulin, kulan mutarim b'davar shezaru kala. All the rows are permitted to non-Kohanim in the case of species whose seed decomposes in the ground, since the seed has decayed and no part of the original Truma is present in the new growth. Then the Chachamim ruled leniently, and they permitted the produce in all the rows, even though most of the rows were planted with Truma. But in the case of species whose seed does not decompose, I feel a mea shel chulin v'achas shel Truma, even if there were 100 rows of chulin and 1 row of Truma, kulan asurin, all the rows are forbidden to non-Kohanim, because part of the original Truma is still present. Moving right along, and Mishnah Vav. Hatevel gidula mutarim b'davar shezaru kala. In the case of processed tevel that was planted, its growths are permitted. to be eaten casually only if it is a species whose seed decomposes when planted. But if it is a species whose seeds do not decompose when planted, even the growth of its growths are completely forbidden because part of the original tevel is present in them. What are examples of this? What are species whose seeds do not decompose? Kagon, haluf, hashum, v'abitzalim. For example, luf, garlic, and onions. A luf is a type of onion as well. Rabbi Yehuda says, hashum kiseorim, garlic decomposes like barley. And the last Mishnah for today, Mishnah Zion, Hamenakish im ha'ovek ochavim bechasayos. If a Jew is weeding a field that was planted with bulbs, a processed chasios. Chasios is a category that includes onions, other species that do not decompose. So if he's weeding the field, then with a idol worshiper in Eretz Yisrael, even though the idolatrous produce is tevel, the Jew may eat from the gross casually, because any produce that was processed by an idolater is tevel only according to rabbinic law. Since the tevel prohibition of the planted bulbs themselves is merely rabbinic, then the Kohanim rule leniently in regard to their gross and allowed them to be eaten casually. And finally, Shesile Truma Shenithmo, young plants of Truma that became plucked, that became Truma, that became Tameh, Shesalan Tameh. If one replanted them, they become Torah with regard to transmitting Tumah to other things. Yagum es ha'ochel. But they are forbidden to be eaten even by a Kohen until he cuts off the edible parts of the plants leaving only the inedible cores and roots. Once the edible parts regrow, they may be eaten by Kohanim. Rabbi Yehuda says, Ad sheyagum yishne. The plants are forbidden until he cuts off the edible parts, and then once they have regrown, does so again. Only that which grows after the second cutting is permitted to the Kohanim. That is the end of Perek test. We'll see you tomorrow for Perek Yud. Have a wonderful day. Thank you for joining us.